hardened criminals repeatedly evade justice, elite police units are created to crack these toughest cases.
Police officers!
My role is investigating serious and organised crime.
We are a covert investigative team.
For the first time across the UK, we have exclusive access to the investigations of Britain's most talented detectives.
We'll spend years putting together all of these tiny pieces of evidence.
The most bizarre investigation I've been involved in.
And share, for the first time, the methods and evidence that bring these criminals to book.
Handguns coming in from the United States.
He had the drugs. That is a lot of money.
A real who did it.
This time, a drug cartel in Surrey.
Have you got anything to say at all?
No comment.
A cutthroat gang working in the fields of Northamptonshire.
Blood, guts, and the flies. It was just like your worst horror movie.
And a mob of car key thieves in Kent.
I like puzzles and figuring things out, which is kind of why I went into being a detective. I was in the Metropolitan Police for approximately 10 years, and I've subsequently moved to Surrey Police. I initially thought that maybe Surrey would be a bit quieter. The reality is it's not quieter.
Surrey Police's drug unit targets local dealers using covert tactics. In 2019, a local neighbourhood police officer flagged up a new target for the unit to investigate.
Our main target came to our attention through intelligence. Various bits of information were coming in about drug dealing in the Surrey area. He may have been enforcing debts.
The suspect was Jack Richardson. He was allegedly beating drug users who owed him money.
We do a thing called lifestyling. It would be looking at social networking. Does he pay tax? What time does he wake up? What vehicles does he have access to? And from our initial review of the suspects, it became quite clear that he was living a jet-set lifestyle. He had very nice cars, a very nice house. He only wore designer clothing. So our first question is where does he get the money? We knew that he had a particular vehicle. And one of the methods we would do would be a random stop on the street to see what he was about.
Road conditions are damp. He had made off just before we put the lights on. I was aware of our presence.
He managed to escape us, and as a police officer, we don't like that.
He's currently lost at this stage.
That was game on for us.
The violence, fears about the scale of the drug dealing, and the suspect's deliberate escape demanded the creation of a special crime squad to investigate.
We had myself. I've got a really good backing in proactive investigations. PC Hartley is really good around surveillance and interventions.
Surveillance was a big part of this operation, and it's really not as glamorous as TV shows like to make out.
We had Ed. He is good at stopping vehicles or stopping persons.
Ed is a covert police officer who needs his identity protected.
Part of my role would be to work as an intervention officer, ultimately arrest the persons involved who are under surveillance.
The team behind Operation Gazebo started work in November 2019.
What we could see from the suspect's call information was he was in quite a lot of contact with his brother. When we looked at the brother's phone, we could tell that he was doing regular visits, almost on a weekly basis, to Liverpool. We just thought he was sourcing large amounts of drugs from Liverpool and taking them back to Surrey.
The team believed the younger brother was doing the legwork, so they worked on a plan to intercept him.
Certain vehicles were identified as potentially being involved in those trips.
Operation Gazebo accessed the National Automatic Number Plate Recognition Network, known as ANPR. This set of cameras on roads across the country records every number plate that travels past. The team needed to confirm Jack Richardson's brother was in the car by tracking his mobile phone.
If you travel with your phone, normally within a mile radius of a built-up area, your phone would hit mast. If you went up to Liverpool, that would be very easy for a police officer to see the movement of a phone. And as the travel takes place, the phones can clearly be seen moving up through the centre of England, up towards Liverpool.
They now had to wait and hope for an ANPR alert that he was on the move.
It was about 2 o'clock in the morning and we got the hit on the M40 and it was that point we knew exactly where that car was going to be heading.
I'd literally just got out the shower to go to bed and I got a phone call. 6 of us and a surveillance team all drove as fast as we could.
It really was cross your fingers time that we were in the right position to get behind that vehicle.
The vehicle was picked up around the M6 toll travelling back towards Surrey. The vehicle then, luckily for us, pulled into Warwick Services. The driver was arrested there and then.
A search of the vehicle was conducted where I found a large quantity of cocaine in the front passenger footwell.
It was certainly a step in the right direction.
My name's Martin O'Neill and I'm a detective from Surrey Police. I'm interviewing you. Please state your full name and date of birth. Your full name?
George Salisbury.
So throughout literally the whole interview just stayed with his head in his arms.
February 2020. The younger brother was facing charges for possessing a kilo of cocaine.
Can you hear what I'm saying?
I don't understand any of this.
What don't you understand?
But the team still needed evidence connecting his older brother Jack Richardson to the crime. Their only hope was via phone communications.
We reviewed my brother's mobile phone and in the early hours of his arrest, the mobile phone is continually ringing and then stopped phoning. And more or less that day after, our main target then dropped his phone as well because he was aware potentially he was being looked at by the police. We then lose track of what he's doing, where is he going. We're blind at that time as to what's going on because as far as we know, he could have left the country. We realised the phone that he had was now in Turkey. Was he on the run? He figured us out and maybe he wasn't going to come back. We figured out in the end he was having his teeth whitened or his hairline fixed. It really does point towards what kind of a person he was. You know, you've got him in Turkey whilst his brother's in prison eating porridge.
3 weeks later, Jack Richardson returned to the UK. Late February 2020. Operation Gazebo surveillance was in overdrive in a bid to snare their tricky target.
We had all kinds of teams on standby. We wanted to see what we'd call in the police a boot to boot, so an exchange of something, an exchange of an item. You know, we know he was dealing drugs at this point, but can we prove it?
It was hoped that having taken out his brother, he would take a more active role in dealing the drugs, but up to that point we just hadn't seen it.
The investigators had to hold their nerve. 3 months into surveillance, an opportunity seemed to arrive.
The 28th of February was a big day.
Surveillance started fairly early in the morning so that we could locate Jack at his home address. He was seen by surveillance to go to and from a Vauxhall Astra that was parked on his road, take a bag out of there and return to his home address.
30 minutes later, he come out of the house, walked towards a different car that was parked further up the road, and he left in that car. At which point it was a race to get behind it and see where it was going.
This could be the drugs handover the team had hoped for.
Jack was then followed and made his way to Leatherhead.
Levitt Road in Leatherhead is a quiet residential street. The police tail were at real risk of blowing their cover.
From across the plane park, they saw the vehicle arrive and he picked up another male.
This was a member of Jack Richardson's drug dealing gang.
And we saw another car turn up, which was a Volkswagen Passat. This vehicle had never come to our attention before. We didn't know who was in it, but we soon realised that bags had been placed into the boot of the Passat with the main suspects in a car nearby and watching everything that was going on. A few minutes later, the gang member removed a large JD sports bag from the boot of the Passat and walked back towards Mr. Richardson. It was definitely at this point we felt strongly that this is the moment that we'd been waiting for.
Elliot and Ed remained on the tail of the main suspect, but the VW Passat looked to be speeding away unimpeded.
I was frantically on the phone, ringing different police forces, getting a marker put on the vehicle for this vehicle to be stopped urgently. Thankfully, Derbyshire Police, they were great. They were like, leave it with us, we'll deal with this.
One male occupant detained in the vehicle, no issues.
It wasn't until that vehicle was stopped that we knew the identity of the driver.
An Albanian national was arrested on the M1.
Along with a large quantity of cannabis was the same bag containing a large quantity of money that we'd seen Mr. Richardson take from the Vauxhall parked outside his house earlier on in the day.
Fair bit of cash. Fair bit of cash. Very nice.
That was really key for us. That showed Mr. Richardson put the money forward for a large-scale drug deal.
Back in Surrey, Jack Richardson and the other gang member had split up.
Our main focus was to stay with the bag, but Mr. Richardson went in one direction in one car, the other suspect went in another direction with another car. It was at this point that we decided it was the time to stop the gang member. Unfortunately, he got away from us, but we were able to recover the car, and within that we found a large quantity of cocaine, a knife.
The gang member had escaped, but he was arrested a few hours later. In the meantime, the surveillance team tracked Jack Richardson to Epsom.
The priority was to get him in custody before he could destroy evidence.
We believe at that point he was fully aware that he was being followed by police.
The decision was then made to arrest him. He saw the car travelling towards him. He then started to run off. He eventually stopped, so there was no dramatic tackle to the floor. He was handcuffed and we walked back to my colleagues.
After 3 months of surveillance and hundreds of hours of tireless investigation, all that could be indisputably linked to Jack Richardson was a small amount of cocaine and Class B weed.
Surrey Police believe that you, if you're not the top member, you're a very senior member of this organised group in relation to supplying Class A drugs. In relation to that allegation, have you got anything to say at all?
No comment.
The key breakthrough was about to come.
We always had the sneaking suspicion, what we're going to find in Jack Richardson's house.
With his MO having previously kept stuff in cars, drugs and money, we suspected those items would be in that car.
The team's perseverance was about to pay off.
You got another shopping bag there full of cash by the looks of things. Okay. That is a lot of money.
Police had uncovered £500,000 in cash in the boot of a car. Operation Gazebo had all the evidence they needed to charge Jack Richardson. Along with the £500,000 in cash, police seized £300,000 of cocaine and cannabis and 6 high-spec vehicles. It was one of Surrey Police's largest cash seizures from a drug operation. 3 members of the cocaine cartel were jailed. The kingpin himself is in prison awaiting sentencing. He's expected to get up to 18 years.
£1,000 worth of cannabis. Did you have anything to do with that drug deal that took place?
No comment. He'll always look over his shoulder for the rest of his life. He may come out of prison after a certain amount of time, but I think he'll always have the sneaking fear that, you know, the police are going to be watching him, and you never know, we might be.
More than 70% of the country's land is farmed. And over 300,000 people are employed in UK farming. Rural theft costs over £40 million a year, including more than £2 million worth of stolen animals. In 2018, 26% of rural businesses were targeted by criminals.
If somebody sat down with, you know, a child in a school and asked them what they want to do when they're older and they said detective, the first thing that will come to mind is, you know, investigate, you know, murders, because that's what's on the television, that's what's on the crime dramas that you watch. Investigating something like this, it's a breath of fresh air because it's something so different.
Northamptonshire is a rural county in the heart of England. 77% of its land is used for farming. So when crime does occur, it's often in remote areas that are difficult to police.
You're talking about such rural areas that it could be a couple of days before the victims in all of this, the farmers, actually identified that they'd been the victim of an attack.
In 2019, reports of a uniquely brutal crime began to come into the police. The bloody slaughter and theft of livestock at local sheep farms.
I received a call from my DCI who'd said that over the weekend we'd had an incident involving the illegal slaughtering of livestock. It's not anything that I've really experienced before in policing.
CID joined with other specialised police departments to help crack the crime.
We used the community teams headed up by Sam Dobbs. Sam's one of those people who would go above and beyond what would be expected of him as a community sergeant, and he was able to forge some really strong working relationships with people.
As a neighbourhood sergeant, you have a very small team of officers and your job is to own crime and antisocial behaviour and disorder on your patch and to be accountable and responsible for it.
March 2019. Operation Stock was up and running, but they were already playing catch-up.
I would be getting phone calls from members of the public. We've just had another one this afternoon. And from that moment on, I knew that this was going to be something we weren't going to be able to ignore. We went to the scene, saw it, smelt it. It was just like your worst horror movie. Blood, lamb's feet, guts, and the flies. I cannot tell you, the flies everywhere. And there's this trail of destruction right to what was obviously the slaughter pen. Just to have to deal with that yourself, but then see the effect on that farmer. It was horrendous.
It was such a rural location. CCTV, there isn't any.
This problem landed on our patch and we hadn't got a clue where it had come from, why it was happening, and that was where we need to work really hard.
Officers from several Northampton police departments were pulled in, attending the initial incidents, reassuring the concerned local residents, and building intelligence.
I remember ringing one of the teams. They drove past a gate. They noticed as they came back the gate was off. They went in the field and they found this horrible crime scene.
It was the sheep farm of Patrick Green. Patrick's family have farmed the land for 3 generations.
We were woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning or 3:30 in the morning by a police officer, and they started to explain what they'd seen, which sounded horrific. As it got light and things like that, I went to have a look and, see what the damage was. This was the gate I get to. I guess it was just getting light by the time we got to the field. The gate was laying on the floor. The gate post was broken. And I looked across the field and all you could see was the remains of what I realised in the end were 26 lambs. Some parts were hanging on the gates over there. Some parts were spread all across the field. And their heads and things like that were in the ditch nearby. All that was important to them was making the small amount of money they were going to get from 26 lambs. To be honest, I don't like leaning on this gate anymore.
By August 2019, 10 farms across the county had now been victim of the barbaric butchering. The crimes were starting to develop a pattern that could ultimately help crack the case.
Put yourself in the suspect's shoes. What do you need in order to commit this kind of offence? Well, you're not going to do it on your own. So we knew we were looking for multiple people. You're going to need a vehicle. You're going to need a large vehicle, but you're going to need a vehicle that can travel on rough ground, potentially a refrigerated vehicle, depending on what you're going to be doing with the meat once the offence has been committed. So these are all things that you start thinking about, right, who are we looking for and where do we focus our attention if we're going to be looking at ANPR data, for example, what kind of vehicle are we looking for?
It was hard old slog, getting out there in the community, being available and visible at night, so the farmers could see us, literally stopping vehicles. I was constantly tweeting what we were doing. And I asked the officers to keep a list of all the villages they'd been to and then did an A to Z. So I could say to the community, whilst you were sleeping, these 28 villages all had a policing presence during the night.
The longer it goes on, the more nervous you become that you're never going to find the people responsible, and this is something that's going to just carry on, and the pressure's never going to ease up.
The slaughtering went on and on throughout the summer months.
We'd had more offences, more outrage. The Police and Crime Commissioner said to me, we cannot let this get out of hand. Whatever you need, let's try and grip this.
The community were angry about it. The farmers were contacting the police and saying, we've got an issue here and we need your help.
Operation Stock still had no leads. Fear and frustration was building in the farming community.
So many people forget that just because a farmer is a business person, they will also have massive emotional attachment to their livestock, which they look after and care for every day.
The vast majority of the farming community are incredibly responsible. But let's be under no illusion, if somebody is attacking your property or if somebody's attacking your home, then you quite rightly will want to defend that.
Police needed the local farmers to act as ears and eyes. But they also turned to technology.
At one point we deployed the drone over fields again to see if we could pick up anything that resembled human beings rather than animals.
Response teams now have access to drones, and that's something that you won't know that a drone is a few hundred feet above you because they're so small and they're so quiet, and in the dead of night they're a really, really good tool for us to be able to not just look for suspects but actually look for where the livestock is, because it's pointless us patrolling an empty field.
Despite the escalated operation, the drones couldn't cover enough ground, and the butchery continued, with police always one step behind.
I think the surprising element of it was how brazen the offenders were. The fact that they were travelling some distance into the county, that they were slaughtering the animals in the field. It's not as if they were throwing them in the back of a trailer and doing their butchery elsewhere. The devastation that they left behind is almost unspeakable. Also, they would keep coming back. And of course, sometimes that's helpful for the police because you know they're going to make a mistake and they're going to trip up.
I always had a view that they'll catch themselves out, as most criminals do, because they get greedy.
And we did have one occasion where we were minutes away. We were minutes away from actually catching them in the act.
At one crime scene, police found knives used in the butchery, suggesting the thieves had been forced into a hasty break-up.
We missed them on this occasion. What could we have done better? It's about continually learning. It's about continually tweaking.
Police knew decisive intervention would be required when the gang next hit, so they got their teams prepared.
The farmers were telling us, look out for full moon nights.
It needs to be a clear and dry night because you're not going to go and do this under torchlight because people are going to see you. And because it was such a rural location, it's obviously going to be pitch dark. Nobody's going to be living out in these locations. You kind of pick this up as you go. Like most investigations, you won't realise until the third or fourth offence that, oh, this was a clear, starry night as well with a full moon. It makes sense that if we're going to plan ahead, we're going to put ourselves in the right place at the right time to maximise our opportunity to catch these people in the act.
Over 7 months, 155 lambs, ewes and rams had been slaughtered. Police felt confident they knew how the gang operated and focused on one particular October evening to make their move.
We spoke to Warwickshire and Leicestershire and we asked for volunteers. We pulled together this quite remarkable operation one night.
We were aware that there was a vehicle of interest to the investigation. We were aware that it was in the county, and we'd already kind of pieced together that there was a common pattern of behaviour, that when this vehicle was in our county, we tended, more often than not, to have an offence on us. When this vehicle came to our attention one Sunday evening, I was very quick to get on the phone to Sam to say, look, let's put all of our tactics in place now and make sure we're ready. Three people ran from the van. Two were arrested immediately following a quick foot chase. Unfortunately, one of them disappeared into the night. However, using the evidence that was left at the scene, using the two individuals that we had caught, property that was in the van, we were able to very, very quickly, within a matter of hours, trace the third individual that ran from the van back to a home address in the West Midlands. All three made a full and frank admission on interview. I wouldn't say that they were remorseful, but they were honest in as much as they told us why they were there and what they were doing.
They were committing these crimes in order to basically sell lamb, clearly making some money out of it, and were then, when they ran out of lamb, were coming back into the county to steal more lamb.
Robert Jordan, Florine Nodo and Birel Manu were arrested. At court, they all pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit theft. They were jailed for a combined total of 10 years.
Sounds twee maybe, but justice was done, justice was seen to be done, and probably when I look back over 30 years of policing, Operation Stock for me will be one of those operations I'm never going to forget.
There are normally over 500,000 domestic burglaries a year in the UK. In 2/3 of burglaries, someone was at home and at risk of a terrifying ordeal. The Crime Survey of England and Wales recorded that in 2019-2020, potentially 24% of vehicle thefts occurred after a home was burgled for its car keys.
Policing in Kent's got some unique challenges. Obviously, we've got the Channel and the borders with France, and also we border London, which is the biggest police force. We do get crime passing through that's not necessarily resident in Kent.
In 2019, the Chief Constable of Kent established a crime squad after a significant spike in residential burglaries throughout the county. Since its inception, his team have secured over 865 years in prison sentences of criminals involved in armed burglary, knife-point robbery and car theft. January 2020, and a rash of house break-ins caught the detective inspector's attention.
Most people would think it very traumatic to have someone coming into their house and stealing their belongings. We noticed a spike in a particular crime type of car key burglaries. By day 2 or 3, we start to realise that there is a pattern and we have got to get a team together. Scott's very tenacious, really thorough, really detailed, works off minimal information.
I had been in my previous role for 9 years. Part of that previous role was looking at crime series, be it burglaries and robberies.
Another member of the team is Matt. He's our intelligence officer.
One of the things I will do on a daily basis is to monitor the incoming calls and monitor the crime reports. Every crime is unique, however people will use MOs that they are familiar with.
An elite crime squad, codename Operation Hallow, set out to quickly put an end to the sudden spate of car key burglaries. But there was very little to go on.
All we had was a bit of CCTV at Medway Services of 2 lads who we thought were likely suspects. We'd identified an older BMW. I did a check on Police National Computer, and what that showed was that some 45 minutes after the second burglary, that vehicle was being chased around the Bexley Heath area of South London by Metropolitan Police officers. There was a chap that was arrested. He was immediately interesting to me in regards to our burglaries.
When Met Police searched the man's vehicle, they found stolen property from the Kent burglary. He was taken into custody, but the rest of the gang remained at large.
Having identified the offender, it was obviously nice that he was away and wasn't able to do anything else, but it didn't give us an awful lot to go on. We were still unsure who the second offender was, if it was the same chap each time or whether he was bringing down somebody else. There was a lot of unanswered questions.
At the end of February, 3 more car key burglaries took place.
The victim there said that he saw them drive off in a small blue vehicle.
After a further 4 car key burglaries in Kent, the police thought they had a breakthrough. The police obtained footage of a blue vehicle visiting a drive-through in Crayford, London.
The CCTV at this place showed the vehicle come up through the drive-through. We could see the false number plate that the vehicle was on. There was cameras in the little booths that the staff are in to take the money and pass over the order. And we could just about see through the window that the driver of the Hyundai was wearing an Under Armour cap. There was nothing facially distinctive about him. The footage wasn't good enough.
You will hit frustrations during an investigation, so you won't see people's faces such that you could recognise them, even if you know who they are.
By working backwards, the team were able to track the movements of the blue car and discovered that someone had visited a retail park in Crayford in the vehicle at the start of March.
The car was in there for about an hour and a half, so the chances are we think they'd gone for a bit of lunch somewhere. Obviously, I didn't know where they'd been, if they'd been into any shops, restaurants or whatever else. It took forever to sort out But actually, when the car came in, where it parked, who got out of it, where they went, and then go to the various outlets of where these people had been to get some more footage and some clear footage of some faces to see if we could try and identify who these people were. It was a long day, that one. I managed to locate 2 people who I thought were the most likely to have parked the small blue vehicle in that car park, and they paid by cash. Shortly after they left, a long blonde-haired female went into another shop on that retail park on her own. Looked at their CCTV and we were trying to get decent images of that female. She made a transaction with a card and we traced the card, we got a name.
It was the first concrete lead on the identity of the gang member, George Knight. Matt now had to profile the target and his habits.
Once it was established that we'd identified him as a suspect for Operation Hallow, the work really began building a picture around him. He was stealing vehicles from the car key breaks and he was taking them, we believed, to be close to his home address. It was for me to provide Scott with updates around what threat he posed to the public, what he was capable of.
Over the course of 4 weeks, CCTV from numerous Kent properties captured men committing several burglaries. Police thought they knew who it was, but they still didn't have enough proof to make an arrest.
Evidentially, we were quite weak at that point. We'd identified him as a potential suspect, but we need more than that.
It's probably one of the most frustrating parts of policing, when you know who's responsible, but you haven't got the evidence to support that.
In March of 2020, we saw an increase in offences in the Medway area. So they'd almost finished with Canterbury, done the west down in Tunbridge, and they started offending in the Medway area. We had offences in Rochester, Chatham and Gillingham, and we had one on the Isle of Grain there. This was really quite key for us because we got an awful lot of footage from private CCTV and ring doorbells and bits and pieces like that. And then we started to get images of not so much people's faces, but certainly the clothing that they favoured wearing, almost their burgling uniform, if you like. They were using a white Range Rover Evoque to do their crimes. Also showed who else he was involved in this criminality with, but we didn't know who they were.
Scott turned to cell phone analysis to try and find out who George Knight was talking to before the crimes occurred.
The mobile phone evidence is key to this case and key to a lot of cases. Most people will carry a mobile phone, and that carries a lot of information.
We managed to get a phone number for George, a list of names and a list of possibles. It was a case of trying to work out which one looks like people in the CCTV.
One person who George Knight often communicated with was Ryan Hull. He was well known to the police.
We had previously investigated the suspect for separate burglary matters, but very similar offending, and so it was quite obvious that they were likely to be offending together, kind of spider webs from there.
CCTV showed that the men involved in the car key burglaries would often wear the same clothes. This gave the police an opportunity to link them to several crimes.
Always seemed to wear a Philadelphia Flyers black cap, a blue puffer jacket with some white writing on the left breast, some grey jogging bottoms and some Nike trainers. So it was important for us then to try and find CCTV footage of them elsewhere when their guard was down, rather than hiding their faces. So we managed to find some footage of them at various retail outlets. They were wearing similar clothing quite often, but they had their guard down, so their faces were shown, and it was then we could say, well, this is the footage from the burglary, this is the footage from the shop, these are one and the same people.
The same CCTV footage also turned up a third suspect.
We uncovered the likelihood a chap was potentially involved in this as well, because he was seen on CCTV with Ryan in these various retail outlets on key nights.
The police had the evidence needed to arrest the three-man gang.
On the 8th of April, the plan was to go and arrest George.
Search warrant, stay where you are.
We found the suspect at his partner's address.
You're under arrest, mate. Conspiracy to burgle. Burgle? Yep. Come in.
A search was done there and we found numerous mobile phones, handsets and SIM cards and bits and pieces there. Similarly, in another address, I don't know how they did it, but the guys managed to find a tiny little micro SIM card in amongst a bundle of clothing, somewhere I wouldn't have looked.
This SIM card placed the second suspect at the scene of multiple crimes and cemented his role in the gang.
When we got into interview, he went no comment to all questions. The longer the interview went on and the more evidence that we kind of dropped into, you could see that he was, the reality was dawning that he was in a little bit of bother.
The police raids were successful. George Knight, Ryan Hull and Matthew Francis were all charged. All pleaded guilty to conspiracy to burgle. They were jailed for a combined total of over 15 years.
It's one of the biggest cases that we've dealt with. 35 burglaries in total. That doesn't happen very often. The majority of the stolen vehicles have been recovered. A lot of them were found on false plates. We got most of them.